Hello, everyone. My name is Ron Sticka. You have joined the third segment of our third annual PTSD Symposium, which is sponsored by the Kim Sticka PTSD Music and Arts Foundation. Our goal is to seek better ways to address the effects of severe stress and trauma, which bring adverse consequences to the way many people live their lives by its impact on the brains and the functioning of the mind. So what we are exploring today is culture, various types of culture. For this segment, we're going to be looking at ethnicity and gender and how culture, as associated in those areas, has impact on the effects of trauma. So we're bringing into our dialogue Ibrahim Coulibaly, who is the Lane County NCAA National NAACP. I just did my application to the NCAA as an official. So anyway, Ibrahim is the president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Lane County. Catherine Wilson is bicultural, having Native American ancestry as well as white ancestry in her background. And Ed Edmo, who is also an Indian, Shoshone and Bannock tribes. And Mina, who just spoke in our last segment, I'm going to have available, who is also identifies as a tribal member of the Yaqui out of the southern U.S. Northern part of Mexico. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ibrahim, in terms of ethnicity, the culture associated with Black culture in particular, and what that culture involves in terms of trauma when it appears, and nuances that maybe those of other cultures should appreciate. So we've got Catherine and Ibrahim. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Ibrahim Coulibaly. I live in Eugene, and I'm the president of NACP, but I have to say that today I'm not representing NACP. I'm here as someone who worked in mental health before, but also who has a lot of interest in understanding folks with PTSD, and who's also looking for ways to be able to help.
I should have also mentioned that you've worked with the state hospital system here in Oregon as well as in France. Is that correct?
Yeah, I worked for Oregon State Hospital for 5 years. Before that, in Paris, I used to work for the city of Paris to do crisis intervention, addressing homelessness during winter time. And I'm an immigrant from West Africa. My country is Burkina Faso, and it's a French-spoken country. My parents moved to Paris when I was young. My take on PTSD related to culture is mainly rooted on how my community in Africa deal with any kind of very difficult situation when it's come to the family level. First, we have that saying, and we have the philosophy that the illness doesn't belong to the person who's ill. The illness belongs to the family, to the community. We have to assist the person to take care of that illness. So you will hear a lot of mothers talking about literally hoping or wishing for them to be able to remove the illness from their kid and put on themselves. And when someone go to the hospital, literally the entire family almost move to the hospital room because people think they have to be there, they have to support the person. The town I grew up in Africa had a mental health hospital, and they deal a lot with PTSD. But on campus there, you will also see a lot of families camping there because the loved one is in the hospital, because they cannot remove themselves from the process between the time the person get exposed to the disease or the illness all the way through the treatment and having the person back in the community. I have two brothers who are in the special forces in my country. They have been to a lot of war zones, Liberia, Guinea, and for the others is still in the war zone actually. And when they came back, when they come back to Africa, and we have conversation with their friends, because like most of you say here, it's not an easy conversation. So usually it's understood what happened, and the family will try to support them in the way that we focus more on praising the person for being here, regardless of what happened. So look at how great you're doing. You've been through hell, you came back. We're happy. So we focus on the recovery part than the trauma itself. We've seen a lot of situations we have a traumatic event and people are either exposed, involved, or witness, or the vicarious trauma later on when it displayed. And people will rarely refer to the traumatic event itself, but they will talk about how far we came, from that situation for you to be here, and that's very important in the community for people to be able to not only know that, well, this person definitely is not the same, that and we identify two kind of PTSD. There is one that they call nyama. Nyama is a PTSD related to very violent situation where the person was involved, like war zone, a military, involved in a combat where they got injured or lost a lot of people, or had to also take people's lives. And the other one is jatige. Jatige is things that happen because we were either exposed or witnessed, and we definitely develop a fear for that thing to repeat itself, or from doing anything else to us. So how they deal with that is the Yama. How they deal with Yama is first seek for people who have the wisdom, and sometimes it's elderly. It can be shamans. It can be people who do the traditional medicine in the community, for them to either come to the house, they literally move that person in the house with them to assist the person who need help, but also for the to give the opportunity for the entire family to be involved in that care process. That's one. For the Gatige, you will most of the time see people uh, uh, um, not giving alone time to the person who they are concerned about. The person will, have friends coming and go. People will plan for to have the person engage in something at all time, while the elders will try to have conversation about it, but not directly with the person on one to one, but with the group of friends. To other people who may be around that person.
Yeah, Ibrahim, that's a good point. If I can just interrupt you for a minute there. Should the approach to treating PTSD and those trauma-related situations be more universal, do you think, an approach, or are there nuances of culture that impact how we treat?
There are nuances, at least for what I've seen here. Well, when I was working at Oriented Hospital, what I have observed is also mostly what happened in a lot of Western countries. It's at some point, because of the way life is, everybody get busy in their own life. People try to make ends meet, and the rhythm, the speed of life. Most of the time, I have the feeling that people who have PTSD one of the main concern is to feel like a burden for their family because they see people coming, sharing the little time they have to be there with them, and it's it's perceived by a lot of them, at least those I had the opportunity to work with and to work around, as being a burden to those people. While I see that's not the case, the structure of the care is different.
Is that because of the culture that they've been raised in, that they're not as so important?
I don't know if it is because I don't think I can talk about a culture, an American culture here, was so different and in many ways that I would say that it is definitely the environment, the impact of the society, the community, how people live, and also economic function has a lot to do with it. Care is not free here. Therefore, when we're seeking for care, it's always a concern for the family and how much it's gonna cost, what is your coverage, and a lot of those kind of things. So all of those take place, and it's kind of change a little bit the approach that we have for when we're going to seek for care differently in Africa, where it is much like an honor for someone to be called to help with a situation like that. So it is a different dynamic. But I do believe that there is a difference here on what may be a traumatic event. It's like if you take talking about racism, or even if you're talking about police. And I know we don't have time. I want to end with one example. A friend of mine, my childhood friend, was visiting here during just before the pandemic. And then because of the pandemic, he got stuck here. He couldn't go back to Africa. And he was trying to find ways to spend some time. So he came here to visit me. And I have a 5 years old daughter. So they were playing and, hide and seek. And at some point, he told my daughter that if you don't find me, I will just call the police for the police to come help you look for me. And my daughter didn't like that. She was like, why are you saying you're going to call the police? Why are you saying you're going to call the police? She didn't like it at all. So, and I was reflecting on that. Here is the one guy coming from Africa, where it's normal for Black people to call the police on, like a regular person would do if they have an issue. But here is someone from America who sees police as being something not appropriate, calling a police for being something not appropriate.
So there's a fear aspect, in other words.
Yeah, I kind of saw that as, I don't know if it's cultural, but definitely a trauma that my daughter is capturing based on her race and ethnicity. So that's clear here. We have different according to who you are, how much you make, who you love, what your race is, ethnicity, gender, whatever, and everything else. You have different kind of trauma. Now, are we capturing that all of that in the treatment? At least the platforms we have to assist those people. Are we capturing those trauma as being potential triggering for PTSD? I'm not sure about that.
Ibrahim, we have limited time, but I was interested to find that you have used music in your therapy successfully.
I did. I did at Oregon State Hospital, and that's not as a therapist. I have to say I'm not a therapist. Not as a therapist, but as someone who was working in the treatment facility and trying to find ways to assist and monitor how effective treatment was on patients. So what I was doing is to try to offer a one-on-one time to a patient and give them the choice to pick the music they want, I'll play the music as long as the video and lyrics are appropriate, and we will have a discussion afterward. Why you pick this music, what that music means to you, what memories, and I've seen people being very dysregulated, being violent, being yelling, not even being able to listen to people, to becoming quiet, listening to music, singing, and having a conversation later on, and remaining regulated for hours. And so, and that was fascinating for me because I I grew up in an environment where music is sometimes used to diffuse situation. You will see a lot of people will remain quiet just to listen to the lyrics because it's kind of triggers something in them that may bring some kind of emotional regulation. So we have used that. I've made a recommendation, and I've made a bullet point for the doctor to put it in the treatment care plan for them to be able to have those moments. And it has been successful. People we had what we call drumming circle. Well, someone will start a rhythm, and other newbies will come and try to mimic that, trying to get in. And then at some point you have the harmony where everybody is playing the same rhythm, and it is they don't put word on it, but after the activity, you kind of feel that connection. You kind of feel that people felt like at some point they felt like we were doing the same thing. We were communicating. We were part
Agreed.
of something, and they were navigating on something.
Ibrahim, I think that's a good place to stop and transition. If Ted Owen were here, he's a music therapist. He does drum therapy and did a demonstration at our last symposium. So I'm going to transition over to Catherine Wilson. So Catherine, picking up on something Ibrahim said about the person who felt, I guess a younger girl or something, that she was not worth the attention from the adults and felt guilty that she was taking time. Is that something that might also be something you have experienced culturally in terms of Native American culture and the role of children? I was thinking about that. You're muted, so you'll have to unmute.
Thank you, Ron, so much for inviting me to this. This has been amazing. I just wanted to say Tatsumewi Latiwa to Edmo, a dear friend who's going to talk after me. Ed has been very involved in helping me heal my PSTD. Mine came from growing up in Chiloquin, Oregon, in a county that had the highest murder rate per capita for 6 years in a row. And it was cowboys and Indians, and it was Klamath and Modocs. The government stuck mortal enemies together, 2 tribes on 1 reservation, and then terminated them.
If I can interrupt for just a minute, Catherine, I want to lay a little foundation that you got yourself into movies. You were involved with the filming of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You're a friend of Ken Kesey and the actor Jack Nicholson. Also involved in Animal House as the casting director, and have had a lot of experience. I really look at movie making as an art to share stories like that. So with that knowledge on the part of our audience, go ahead and continue.
Essentially what I wanted to say is that I didn't know any different until my mom finally moved us to Eugene here and closer to her parents. And all of a sudden, the arts were available everywhere in this town, and it saved my life. As a bicultural, what that means is like you are in a dominant culture, say the white culture, and which is like the Atlantic Ocean, but you yourself, the other culture, they're side by side, they don't mix. It's like the Gulf Stream and the Atlantic Ocean. And you in your own mind have to interpret the 2 cultures to yourself. And what they're finding now is that we are able to interpret two cultures to others. And how we do that is, for instance, using symbolism like motion pictures. I became, after I was a poet, because I had trouble with the English language. The English language, by the way, is a systemic dominant culture language. I have to struggle with English teachers because I don't use the aggressive voice. My syntax is American Indian, it's passive. And when they mark up my papers and flunk me for not having an aggressive voice, that is a perfect example of this systemic racism or otherness that is in this culture. So as a poet, I became a poetic cinema filmmaker because I found I could express myself with images a lot better than I could with words. And I became very successful doing that. And Ken Kesey was part Cherokee. Most people don't know that. And what he did is he created, he spoke even when we were out at the farm in the kitchen, he spoke in metaphor. He was a bicultural, metaphorical speaker. And One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was such a huge success because it reached through the metaphorical language and images and story people of all different cultures. It was directed by a Czechoslovakian who had learned how to be a subversive filmmaker under a communist regime by using images of mise-en-scène and other things available that are symbolic and cultural. Music. Jack Nietzsche did the music, and it was American Indian music. There was an American Indian who was the hero of the story. It was something that it won more Academy Awards than any other film in 47 years because it so resonated. And that is my hope, because what I'm hearing today and learning so much from all the other speakers is that feeling of otherness. And that feeling of otherness and watching my neighbor murder, his wife right in front of me. He blew her head off at 5, 6 years old. All of that contributed to creating my career because I came from a place as a young girl of wanting to help heal what was going on in the world. And that's what I've devoted my life to. And how I do that is because of Edmo and his wife. I found out who I really was because my family, we did not talk about your Indianness. It was considered, a subculture. It was considered, you were considered animals. Indians were not accepted. And so it was a secret. It was a family secret. And I've been through a lot of healing about my family secrets. And I just want to show, it's a quote by John Trudell. And he talks about how this technological society is really creating a lot of separation and otherness between people. And what I'm hearing is when we come together as a community, there's a lot of healing. But he said one of the objectives of technological reality has to do with erasing the memories of the human beings, because we have a collective common experience. We are all descendants of tribes. Because we have ancestral memory, it's encoded in the DNA. It's a genetic memory. My son is now with a woman who is a neuroscientist who got a grant to help try to heal the trauma of 7 generations of my people, the Nez Perce. They have proven that DNA memory, especially traumatic memory, can go back 6, 7 generations. And healing from that. And the image I wanted to share was essentially this. When we heal ourselves, we heal our ancestors from wounds that run deep in our family. When we heal our ancestors, we heal the world from wounds that run deep in humanity. And that is what I'm seeing what you are doing here, Ron. You're opening up a place where people can share ways of healing. And for me, art therapy saved me. and also one-on-one talking, like by the grace of the Creator, I'm going on 35 years clean and sober. And that is not a clinic setting. That is a one-on-one. It is essentially that there is no dogmatic religion allowed. It is people that have been there that reach out to help new people turn around and help other new people. You gravitate to the people like Amina was talking about that share your experience or come from where you come from. You know, I'm really excited about what the possibilities are for our world if we can allow this great country of ours, this melting pot, if we can allow all these different cultures to teach each other, like Ibrahim was teaching us about, you know, doctoring and the shamans and the elders. And Ed Edmo, I'd like for him to share now if I've made any sense.
No, you made a lot of sense, Catherine. I appreciate that. I think you're saying there's strength in interculturality where we can take the strengths each culture brings to the table. And each culture's had issues and problems. That's sort of what I was asking you in terms of young kids in the tribes and things like that. Do they feel, you know, that they're secondary citizens? I've dealt with Asian youth. That's sort of the way they're raised, that the youth are to be seen and not heard. And that's culture, you know, frankly, that comes out of Europe too. So we learn different ways of living as we progress. And I think that's great. Good job, Catherine. And let's go ahead and bring Ed in then at this time.
Hi, I'm Ed Edmo.
Nice to meet you, Ed.
I'm Travis Shoshone, Bannock, and Nez Yakima. Raised about 95 miles east of Portland at a place called Slala Falls. I was raised by trauma. In the Dalles, Oregon, 6 miles west of us, were signs in the window saying no dogs or Indians allowed. Go and walk down the street, white boys spit on me. Go back where he came from, dirty Indian. I got a picture of me and my brother entering the swimming pool. Didn't allow us into the swimming pool. No, had to sit in heaven because of the main floor of the movie theater. Raised over prejudice. Only go to Johnny's Cafe, only restaurant you could eat in. Could go to any restaurant to eat. Mom had to go to the home of the beautician to get her hair done. Couldn't go to the beauty shop. So I was raised with over depression.
Is that like the experience of many blacks down south and in our nation? Yes. Do you share that kind of cultural experience in that regard?
Yes, it was, but it was in the 1950s in the Dalles, Oregon, here in Oregon.
Right.
Not in the south, it was here.
Oh, I know, but I'm just wondering if that compares to the way the blacks
were. It was, yes.
The segregation.
Yeah. And on Facebook, I had a picture of the house across the tracks. A black family lived, we never saw them at night, neither, you know. There's things you don't do. Period. You know, and I understand those rules and parameters.
Right. How are you able to deal with your trauma?
Well, I go to ceremonies. I go to the sweat lodge. I go to sun dances. I go to pipe ceremonies. And both of my culture helps me heal. You know, I got healed. I used to sweat when I was a kid at Salilo. My uncle would sweat, jump in the river between rounds. Now it's hard to sweat because we got the pandemic, you know. So it's difficult to find a sweat lodge for healing, you know. So it's difficult to do the thing that we normally do because of the pandemic. I'm glad we're seeing a change in the country. You know, it's slow to come, you know. Not only was it, my culture was destroyed through the Dalles Dam, 1957. I saw the floodwaters come up, really hurt my heart and bad and hard. My culture was taken away. My longhouse was taken away. My songs were taken away. My way of life was taken away, not replaced for anything to replace it. So I became alcoholic. I shot drugs. You know, I dealt guns.
That's been a common experience among the Indian nations, that because of these losses, they resorted to substances like alcohol, and that was to their detriment.
I can't speak for other people, but, you know, our stories are similar. Our culture was taken away. I was told not to worship. I was supposed not to go to, not speak a language, not sing our songs. They put us in government schools. They say, kill the Indian, save the man. They whipped us for speaking our language and doing our culture, you know. My grandfather went to Carlisle Indian School. Colonel Pratt began it. He thought we should be white. And he learned how to hit, you know. We never did hit people a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So we learned, the traits were learned. We never sexually abused our families like we learned from the Europeans got here, you know.
So have you learned better ways to deal with those kinds of traumas? Are we coming together better as a nation, or are there other things we should be doing?
There's a legend about that. Up north, they had no sun or moon, there was darkness, and they had fire, but they could hunt. The wind came through the camp and blew the oil lamps. Imagine the woman had away with her, had held on her mouth so she couldn't cry out. Put your hands in the ashes. When you munch, you can rub his back. You can tell when it's time to eat who it was. She did that. He jumped on her and had away and put his hand in. I said she wouldn't scream out. She rubbed his back. The voice she saw was her brother. She cut her breast off. Here, take my breast. You liked him when you mounted me. She took fire, chasing him. He grabbed a stick of fire, running backwards. He trapped his arms and went out. Went up to the mountain. They jumped up into the sky, went across the sky. They changed it to the sun and moon. Never see the sun and moon at the zenith, the flight of the flight. They will never share the same sky. That's why we shouldn't treat a relative like that. Wow. We have legends to prevent things like that.
Fight and flight. That's characteristic of PTSD. We deal with, you fight or you flee from it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. That was right.
Therapies among the nations, the tribal nations that you're familiar with, since you have multicultural within the Indian American community, what are the things that seem to work better for dealing with the traumas generated by the past and anything that's currently going on?
I'm still seeing a counselor for my issues. They don't have cultural PTSD, but I'm a survivor of incest, sexual abuse, you know, trauma. So I'm still seeing a counselor. And I'm in recovery, you know.
What should we be doing then to deal with this?
I think train more people of color. I got an email from OPB the other day. It said people of color are having trouble finding counselors of color to talk to the issues. I had a black counselor. He was a master's in counseling. Tell me about the Indian people. Tell me about Indian this, Indian that. So I spent half my time explaining what tribes, explaining what history was, explaining what our view on the world was. That wasted my time, cost me money, yet I was educating him. We should educate more people that are people of color to do counseling.
Is it fair to say therapists should have a good appreciation for the culture or various cultures that impact the person that they're treating?
Yes, yeah.
And how can they best gain that?
There's a book called Do All Indians Live in Teepees, put out by the Smithsonian Museum of American Indian. It talks about stereotypes and Indians and teepees. It's called Do All Indians Live in Teepees. It's a good book.
That's actually a segue into our next section on cultural chaos theory. Anything else you want to say, Ed?
Ron, I wanted to add to Ed's story.
Go ahead.
When I was struggling to learn this family secret, you know, I was always different. My feet were whiter. I got beaten for burying my shoes. Dentists didn't understand about the double nerve ganglia. My whole life, I felt like I didn't fit in because of this Gulf Stream in me. And Ed Edmo's wife, who was a counselor, Ed, right, at Portland State, or was it Portland Community?
Portland Community.
Yes. She did a ceremony and welcomed me home. It was so incredible. I don't know how to say this, but I'm going to say that I think culturally, more people in each culture can help their own people better, like the elders can, because they know our DNA memory. They know where the systemic trauma began, and they have ways to help us heal. Who would have known that Carol doing a ceremony welcoming me home to myself would have been so healing?
Catherine, were drums involved with that? I've heard some things with drum therapy. Is that
Yes.
involved?
Well, the 7-drum ceremony is what I was driving 8 hours to hear and 8 hours back because it was so healing.
Okay.
And then don't forget the bells. You know, the Sahapian tribes of Oregon are do washat with bells, and the sound of the bells is incredible.
So anything else, Catherine? I'm going to let Mina, were you going to ring a bell or something for us? I don't think we heard that. I don't know if you muted. Mina, I'm going to go to you for just a minute, see if you have any comment you would like to add, and then we're going to go to our last segment. Mina?
I'm prominently Yaqui Indian and Filipino by way of Mexico, my family's ancestry. So I come from a family whose generational trauma includes, kind of like Catherine was saying, is like hiding our indigenousness. So while I am indigenous, I was raised in the Chicano culture. I think it was my great-grandparents or my great-great-grandparents that when they started being part of the census, didn't identify their indigenousness. They identified as being from Mexico, so as like Mexican. I found out later, I was about second grade when I found out that we actually had indigenous blood, and I was put into a program at school for normally classes I got to participate. When I told my mom, she pulled me out because it was supposed to be this thing that's like quiet, a secret, because it identified more otherness into our family than what we already were. But one of the things that I dealt with personally was when I was transferred schools when my mom moved us. I was transferred to a school where I was the only child of color in this school, in this elementary school. I was in kindergarten, and I talked with, even though I didn't speak Spanish or my native language, I talked with the accent, the way I pronounce things. Therapy,
and I think we heard a little bit of that from our last presentation too, that language and not speaking language seems to have issues that can themselves bring on trauma. So anything else you want to add, Mina?
Yeah, I was put into this, okay. Well, like I said, I was put into a speech therapy program so I can unlearn the way I learned to speak, so I can speak basically how I speak now. And that for me was a traumatic event. And I think that when it comes down to like educating people of different cultures with accents, that schools and their advisors need to be aware that children are not speaking incorrectly. They're speaking the way that their culture is, and that's something that should be addressed instead of putting them into these speech programs so they can sound more American, whatever that
means. Amen, sister.
Was that Catherine?
I have to say.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine, if you have any further response on that.
I just want to say amen to Mina, because that is traumatic itself. To be forced to speak in an aggressive way when you're a passive person, you know, that really needs to be looked at in this culture.
Good.
How systemic, you know, the neuro-linguistic programming is for aggression. Hello? Yes.
Ed, anything else you would like to say? You're muted, Ed, but if you would like to close.
Nothing else to say. Thank you for listening. Yeah, I put some stuff in the chat. I put some stuff in the chat resources.
Yeah, good.
Okay, good. Okay.
I checked the chat and I see lots of good questions and comments, which we intend to respond to and pass on to those to whom they're intended. And we'll have questions shortly. Grace, who is handling our recording, just keep it rolling on this. I'm going to work cultural chaos theory into this particular segment. It won't be too long. So David Wade, you can come in too. You can join David. And so we're still rolling, and I'll just go ahead and while David is being brought in, I have a topic, cultural chaos theory. Chaos theory has actually been around for quite some time, developed during the 19th century based on mathematical principles, but it basically concluded that even within apparently random complex systems, there are underlying connections, patterns, and influences which might be predicted, but for which long-term predictions are nearly impossible because there are so many dynamics. This is also known as the butterfly effect. I bet it's something the Indian nations have known, that everything interacts with each other, and there's sort of a commonality. And there was also mentioned that we have a common mother, which is actually proven, I believe, scientifically, that we all originated, as shown by DNA testing and research, from someone they call Eve out of the middle central area of Africa long, long ago. So in a fashion, we could all be brothers and sisters. I think examples of chaos theory can be demonstrated: weather patterns, galactic movement, the stock market. Believe it or not, there are so many factors that enter that. Things are hard to predict with certainty, and the operations of the various governments of our world. We just don't know it all and don't know how everything interacts. So we're all fallible in that respect. But the butterfly effect is one essentially that if a butterfly is flapping its wings, let's say here on the west coast of the United States, that it in some indirect and very minor way influences the weather patterns in Asia or in Africa or any other part of the world, which is a reach, but that's essentially the genesis of the theory, that everything interacts with everything else. And when graphed out, you can really see that there are connections, and then there are spaces of void, as there is within our universe. We have clusters of stars, and then lots of what appears to be totally void of matter. So with that in mind, is that a principle we should maybe apply to diverse cultures, particularly on the theme? I'm bringing David Wade in to discuss. Both of us, myself, I've been a lawyer and a judge in the past. David Wade is a lawyer still practicing and will be our next president of the Oregon State Bar, to assure people that we are concerned about honesty, integrity, and the ethics of practice, that when we say we assure justice for all, that we really do so. That's an important concept. It sort of gets back to the harmony and integrity that I opened the meeting with, that as long as people realize and hope and expect that people will interact in that way, we will all do much better. So, David, you, I saw, were coming up as a speaker on white culture, and to tie that in also from your perspective and speaking for the Oregon State Bar here before long, how do we, as lawyers, and lawyers that in the past have been traditionally male and pretty much white, but expanding very quickly into minorities and women. I think women are going to take an equal stance here before long, that we'll have as many women lawyers as men, and maybe they've already exceeded that number. So David, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Oregon State Bar.
Just with that in our backgrounds, you've heard some things about other cultures, and we probably need to keep in mind that as white people, and maybe viewed in some fashion by others, that we are deemed oppressors, that actually we're also subject to oppressions because we don't come from one tribe in Europe. There have been many peoples in Europe. They fought and done a lot of fighting among each other. We've sustained our own forms of trauma in the past. And it was also mentioned about genetic trauma, that there is actually evidence that supports we are products of our ancestors in a certain fashion, and perhaps in a very minor way. So that's part of cultural chaos too. So how do we perceive, and I know we've got Senator James Manning on, maybe James, if we can bring James into this, it might be good. James Manning is a senator from our local area, a state senator, African American. He's a former law enforcement officer and also has been a veteran. And is very interested in what we're doing with our foundation and these symposia to talk about PTSD and trauma issues and what can we do to make things better. I think part of that goes into how we make the laws, what cultures do we view, and how do we enforce those laws? Are we doing so fairly? I'm going to let David first have the floor on this, and then, James, we may let you have a few remarks here to end us. David?
So, like I say, I don't speak today on behalf of the Oregon State Bar or its Board of Governors, only on behalf of myself. What I have learned over the past many years of what we call DEI training is that white people are not generally aware that they have a privilege in this society. And because they're not aware of it, they don't see the impact it has on people of color especially. And so, for example, there's, medical evidence that African Americans in large numbers actually suffer from PTSD on an ongoing basis because they're in constant fear of being beaten or shot by law enforcement or by militias or whatever, and that this is a very serious medical problem in the African American community. And also due to my friendships in the Navajo Nation and attending a Navajo ceremony and and going on trips with the Oregon State Bar to the nations here in Oregon, that the cultural pressure on them causes tremendous health problems. And what I'm learning is that in white culture, we're not aware of this. We're not aware that we have the special privilege of not being afraid of law enforcement, that we feel quite free to call the police when others might not, and that we're not followed around in grocery stores or jewelry stores on the theory that we're shoplifting, and that we're mostly graded by other white people in everything we do, school, everything in the criminal justice system is basically all white. The prosecutors are all white, the judges are all white, the juries are mostly white. That is slowly changing, but it's still a fact. Even in the South, where you have large populations of African Americans, they rarely see an African American in the criminal justice system. So for those of us who are involved in access to justice, these are very present and current issues, and they are not easily resolved.
Are you optimistic for the future?
Yes, and but that is because of demographic change. That is to say, people of color are becoming more demographically present and electable, and will eventually start appearing as prosecutors, judges, and juries. And, by 2050, we'll probably be a minority-majority nation. So that's very long term. Short term, I think it's still a struggle.
Well, and hopefully we become interrelational and intercultural in so many ways. And women, there are a lot of women practicing law where it was almost unheard of when I went through law school that you would even see a lady in the classroom.
Yes, the problem there is they're not being promoted to the senior positions in their law firms, and they're not getting the best clients. And so their numbers are really good. Their economic prominence, not so good yet.
Yeah, the glass ceiling is still in many law firms.
Very much enforced.
I think part of the message is that things are improving. Did you have anything else you want to say right now, David?
No, just that because we're more aware of it, right, as a state bar, we are now doing something about it.
And there have been lots of writings on that in our journals, and lots of cross-cultural training and ethics training. And I think we just want to assure people that most lawyers are people of goodwill and want to make sure everyone is fairly treated. We have to also deal with the perceptions of unfairness that may not in fact be factual unfairness, but we have to be very careful how we interact, that we're not giving false impressions that we don't care or are not sensitive to the needs of particular people. James, I sort of called on you just walking by the classroom, so to speak, and calling you in, but you're a lawmaker. Have you found this useful to get feedback from other people on what we see as our concerns and the needs to maybe talk more and look for better ways to do things in the future than they've been done in the past?
Well, first of all, Colonel, let me thank you again for hosting this again. What are we, your third?
This is the third time, and you've been a great supporter of it, I have to say.
You do some marvelous work and stuff, and the issue that you have undertaken is really very critical. Today, I've been listening to a lot of input from a spectrum people from different sides, different views and stuff. And there is one thing that's in common is that trauma doesn't care about color of skin, doesn't care about economic or socioeconomic status. I do want to say thank you very much to David for his presentation or his testimony. He said a lot of things that a lot of people are starting to come to reckoning with. But, you know, we're talking about years and patterns. I have a nephew in St. Louis. He wants to move to Oregon. He's a police officer in the St. Louis metro area. But he's did a little research, and he's afraid he has 2 little boys, and he's afraid to bring his little boys here to Oregon. He's afraid of what he's heard about the past of Oregon, and it may not be conductive or welcoming to his sons, their kids. I go to the schools, and I'm working with one school district where little black African-American kindergarten was in classroom, and her classmates began to call her the N-word. She didn't deserve that. And the teachers just say, well, they didn't mean that. So they don't take any responsibility for that. This is how these traumatic experiences start to develop and continue to permeate, because they start a place where people are not being more proactive, saying this is not acceptable and we have to do better by allowing it to go by. Because when I talk to a lot of people that I know, especially people that millionaires, I explain to them, I understand why you don't see it. Doesn't happen in your neighborhood. It's not in your household. So to you, I understand why you think that it doesn't exist, because you don't deal with it on a daily basis. And when you see it in the news, you automatically assume that it was their fault. They brought it upon themselves. So speaking from a place of privilege, like David had brought out and raised, which is a discussion that we're having all over the place, is really important. There is good news, though. The good news is that the country is starting to become more unified. I think that it's unfortunately the events that happened with George Floyd opened the eyes of the world. And people are stepping up, and they're saying that this is we've been hearing about. Now we actually experience it through visual means. And no, we're not okay with this. So I am very hopeful that America is going to be coming to a more united, inclusive place. Opportunities will start to open up, but then we have to be cognizant of the fact that we can't regress into this thing called wait your turn. I've been waiting my turn for a long time. And if I continue to wait my turn, when will my turn? I think Martin Luther King Jr. or one of our other great civil rights leaders said, if not now, when? So dealing with trauma, dealing with stress, dealing with mental illness, things like that, something that we can no longer put off. We can't put it on police departments. As a former police officer, they're not equipped for this. We cannot defund the police departments. Nobody I know of wants to defund the police departments. They want more accountability and they want safer neighborhoods. But at the same time, they don't want to, every time you see a police car come, everybody run and hide because of that fear. If they stop, something tragically is going to happen. That really is factual and it exists. People are afraid. People that are BIPOC community members are afraid when they see the police because all of the, regardless of all the phenomenal great things that our officers are doing. So again, you know, I want to thank you for this opportunity again to sit in and further in this conversation. It does work with me when I'm bringing forth more legislation, which I intend to approve and provide. And I will be calling on you as far as veterans, how we can get something more substantial for veterans. And more importantly, that I'm going to ask you to do a presentation on veterans and music and the programs that you have. It's going to help elevate the state and mental challenges that we have. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, James. I think it's time to close. We've actually done pretty well. We're going to have time for questions, so stand by, but I'm going to close out the video part. I did want to mention just a couple of things real quickly. I've had this picture. It's a Bev Doolittle behind me, and I don't know how well you can see it. It's got a man riding on a horse through a wooded area, but it has things in it that are subliminal that some people don't see and others can see, will come to their attention. And I don't have it on a large screen, but if you'll look in this particular area, and actually the way the lighting was, I don't know if you can still see it, if you let your subconscious just sort of float and you start seeing things that your conscious mind doesn't necessarily see. So there are 3 eagles and then the face of a Native American in there as well. So I think that's sort of emblematic of what we're doing today. And I've been wearing this hat. It's sort of something I picked up. I have taught guitars for vets and I visit the VA clinic, and it says Operation PTSD Veteran. I am a veteran. The part on the front here says don't trip my trigger, and people with PTSD do have triggers, and it's just a symptom of the condition that people are hypervigilant and still have fear for what they've experienced that could be set off. We've talked about that in prior symposia, that a triggering event is not a memory. It puts the person back in the trauma event from what we take, that it's real to them and it's a present threat. So it's hard to bring people out of those conditions. But I think what we bring today in the message is one of hope. Let's make this a real organization and movement. I was told, well, that's just a joke. And I said, well, it doesn't sound like it to me. I think we're going to have Operation PTSD launched, and that's what our foundation is reinforcing. I think what comes to us today are messages of hope, that there is good news ahead, that if we work together properly as a community and see things the way they are, and not just the illusions that sometimes we see or think we know things, that we might be in error. If we work together as a community, we will bring the light and see things a whole lot better.